He was searching for peace, but all he found was crushing disappointment. That was all veteran Jake Riley got when he inherited a polluted lake and a derelict cabin. But just then, his only companion, a service dog named Rex, began to act strangely. He led Jake to the base of an ancient tree and began to dig frantically. And there, beneath the soil, they found a sealed box. Little did Jake know, the decision to open that box would drag him into a dangerous fight he wasn't prepared for, and that its secret was far darker than the stagnant waters of the lake. Please support us by subscribing to the channel. The city noise was a constant assault. Car horns blared, sirens wailed in the distance, and the murmurs of 1,000 lives bled through the thin walls of Jake Riley's small apartment. He sat on the edge of his bed, hands resting on his knees, staring at a crack in the plaster. Every sharp sound was a potential threat, a trigger that sent a phantom jolt through his nervous system. It had been years since his last tour, but the war had followed him home, taking up residence in the quiet corners of his mind. He was a man carved from hardship. In his mid-30s, Jake was tall and lean, with a kind of wiry strength that came from discipline, not choice. His brown hair, cut short in the military style he never abandoned, was showing threads of silver at the temples. His face was a map of his past, weathered and lined, but his blue eyes held a deep kindness that hadn't been extinguished. He wore his usual uniform, a plaid shirt of navy, gray, and muted beige, left unbuttoned over a simple gray t-shirt, paired with faded blue jeans and a pair of sturdy work boots that had seen better days. A wet nose nudged his hand, followed by a soft whine. Jake looked down into the intelligent amber eyes of Rex, his constant shadow. Rex was a 5-year-old German shepherd, his magnificent coat a striking blend of gray and white fur. He was more than a dog, he was a lifeline. They had served together, and when Jake's service ended, he fought to adopt the dog who had saved his life more times than he could count. Now, in the disquiet of civilian life, it often felt like Rex was still saving him, grounding him with his unwavering loyalty and calm presence when the walls started closing in. "I know, boy," Jake murmured, his fingers sinking into the thick fur of Rex's neck. "Too loud out there. Too loud in here, too." The phone call had come 2 days ago. It was from a lawyer, a Mr. Abernathy from a small town in Oregon Jake had never heard of. The man's voice was dry, like rustling paper. He informed Jake that his great-uncle, Simon Riley, had passed away and left him his sole heir. Jake barely remembered the man. He was a reclusive figure from his mother's side of the family, a name mentioned in passing at holidays long ago. An eccentric scientist, she had called him. The inheritance wasn't money. It was a piece of land, a property with a cabin and a lake, tucked away in the dense forests of rural Oregon. The lawyer had been straightforward, almost apologetic, mentioning that the property had been neglected for some time, but, to Jake, the words neglected and remote sounded like a promise of silence, a chance to escape the relentless city that kept his wounds raw. He had packed what little he owned into his old pickup truck that same evening. There was nothing holding him here, no job he cared about, no relationships that had survived the changes in him. There was only Rex. The drive west was long. For 3 days, they crossed the country, the concrete jungle slowly giving way to vast plains, then to the formidable peaks of the Rocky Mountains. With each mile that passed, Jake felt a knot in his chest loosen. He drove with the window down, the clean, cool air, a welcome change from the city's smog. Rex sat proudly in the passenger seat, his head often stuck out the window, ears flapping in the wind, a picture of pure joy. During the quiet hours on the road, Jake would talk to him, his voice low and steady. He told Rex stories from their time in the service, good memories he clung to, and spoke of his hope for this new place. A place to heal. They arrived in the small town of Pine Creek, Oregon, in the late afternoon. It was exactly what he had hoped for. A single main street with a handful of shops, a gas station, and a diner. The air smelled of damp earth, pine trees, and rain. After a brief stop at the lawyer's office to sign the final papers and pick up a set of old brass keys, Jake followed the hand-drawn map Mr. Abernathy had given him. The paved road soon turned to gravel, which then dissolved into a rutted dirt track that wound deeper and deeper into the forest. The trees grew thick and tall, their branches forming a dense canopy that plunged the path into a perpetual twilight. Finally, the track opened into a clearing, and there it was. Jake's heart sank. The lawyer's word, neglected, was a kindness. The cabin was a dilapidated structure of dark, weathered logs, its porch sagging precariously to one side. A few windows were boarded up, and the stone chimney looked as if it might crumble at any moment. It looked less like a home and more like a relic, a testament to decades of solitude and decay. But it was the lake that truly stole his breath, and not in a good way. It was large, yes, but it was no pristine mountain retreat. The water was a murky, unnatural shade of greenish-brown, and a slick, oily sheen coated its surface near the banks. It was completely still, without a single ripple, as if the water itself was too heavy and stagnant to move. A pungent, metallic odor hung in the air, a foul mix of decay and chemicals that stung his nostrils. It wasn't a lake, it was a swamp. Jake killed the engine, the sudden silence of the forest pressing in on him. Beside him, Rex whined again, a low, uneasy sound. The dog's ears were flat against his head, and he didn't move to jump out of the truck. "Well, boy," Jake said, his voice hollow with disappointment. "This is it. Home sweet home." He got out of the truck, his boots crunching on the gravel. He walked slowly toward the edge of the water, Rex now cautiously at his heels. The smell was worse up close. There was no sign of life. No fish breaking the surface, no birds on the water, not even the buzz of insects. There was only this dead, silent body of water and the crumbling cabin that stood watch over it. The profound quiet he had craved now felt oppressive, menacing. This wasn't a place of healing. It felt like a place where things came to die. A wave of despair washed over him. He had driven across a country, chasing a ghost of hope, only to find a tomb. The first morning at the property dawned gray and damp. A thick mist clung to the trees and rolled over the stagnant surface of the lake, carrying the foul metallic scent right to the cabin's front door. Jake hadn't slept well. He had spent the night in the cab of his truck, Rex curled up on the bench seat beside him. The cabin had felt too much like a tomb, its dark, silent interior unwelcoming. He stood now on the sagging porch, a mug of instant coffee steaming in his hands. The warmth did little to chase away the chill that had settled deep in his bones. It was a chill of disappointment. He had imagined a place of quiet solitude, a sanctuary where the ghosts of his past might finally grow quiet. Instead, he had inherited a wasteland. Rex stood beside him, alert and tense. The dog hadn't relaxed since they arrived. His body was rigid, his ears constantly swiveling, scanning the silent woods that pressed in on all sides. He let out a low growl, not of aggression, but of deep unease. "Easy, boy," Jake said, resting a hand on Rex's head. "Nothing out there." But he didn't believe his own words. The silence here wasn't peaceful. It was watchful. The complete absence of birdsong or the chatter of squirrels was deeply unnatural. After forcing down a dry energy bar, Jake decided he couldn't just stand here and sink into despair. He needed to move, to do something. He needed to know the full extent of this forgotten piece of land. "Come on, Rex. Let's go for a walk. See what old Uncle Simon left us." He clipped a leash onto Rex's collar, more for his own sense of security than for any need to restrain the dog. They started their patrol, moving counterclockwise around the perimeter of the foul lake. The ground was soft and spongy near the water's edge, and strange, rust-colored deposits stained the rocks. The trees grew right up to the bank, their roots like gnarled fingers dipping into the murky water. They walked for nearly an hour, the scenery unchanging in its bleakness. Jake's mind, trained to notice details, to spot things that were out of place, scanned the environment. He was on autopilot, his military training taking over. It was a way to keep his thoughts from spiraling. Then, he saw it. On a small rise, about 50 yards from the shore, stood a massive, ancient oak tree. Its branches were thick and sprawling, a giant in a forest of lesser trees. But it wasn't the tree itself that caught his eye. It was the ground at its base. In one specific spot, the blanket of moss and fallen leaves was disturbed. The soil beneath looked darker, as if it had been turned over more recently than the surrounding earth. It was subtle, something most people would walk right past. But to Jake, it was like a flag. As he steered them closer, Rex's behavior changed instantly. The dog's uneasy tension transformed into sharp, focused excitement. He began to pull on the leash, his powerful body straining forward. A low whine escaped his throat, and his tail, which had been tucked low, began to wag frantically. "What is it, boy? What do you smell?" Jake unclipped the leash. Rex bounded forward, straight to the disturbed patch of earth. He lowered his nose to the ground, sniffing a small area with an intensity that Jake recognized immediately. This was how Rex acted when he was on the scent of something hidden. After a moment, he looked back at Jake, let out a sharp bark, and began to dig, sending clumps of dark soil flying. A jolt of adrenaline shot through Jake, overriding his earlier despair. He trusted this dog's instincts more than his own. Rex wouldn't react like this to a squirrel's buried nuts. This was something else. All right, I see you," Jake said, a hint of excitement in his own voice. He jogged back to his truck and retrieved the small, foldable entrenching tool he always kept stored behind the seat. When he returned, Rex had already dug a respectable hole. Jake took over, the shovel biting into the soft, damp earth. The work was rhythmic and grounding. With each shovelful of dirt he tossed aside, his curiosity grew. What could his eccentric, reclusive uncle have buried out here in the middle of nowhere? After about 15 minutes of digging, the shovel hit something hard with a dull thud. It wasn't the hollow sound of wood or the sharp crack of rock. It was the solid, unyielding sound of dense plastic or metal. "Easy now," he murmured, kneeling down. He used his hands to carefully clear the remaining dirt away. His fingers brushed against a hard, textured surface. Slowly, he unearthed a large black case. It was a pelican case, designed to be waterproof, crushproof, and dustproof. A serious piece of equipment for protecting something valuable. It took all his strength to haul the heavy case out of the hole. He set it on the ground, his heart pounding in his chest. Rex circled it, sniffing intently before sitting back on his haunches, looking up at Jake as if to say, "Well, open it." He asked to rise. Jake carried the case back to the cabin and set it on the relatively stable section of the porch. The latches were stiff, sealed tight by years of underground pressure and moisture. He had to use the blade of his pocket knife to pry them open. With a final, loud snap, the case hissed as the pressure equalized and the lid swung open. Inside, nestled in custom-cut foam, was a single, thick, leather-bound notebook. It was old, the leather worn smooth with time, but it had been perfectly preserved. Not a speck of moisture or dirt had touched it. A faint, musty smell of old paper and ink rose from the case. With a sense of reverence, Jake lifted the notebook out. It felt heavy in his hands, heavy with secrets. He sat down on the top step of the porch, Rex resting his head on Jake's knee. He opened it to the first page. The paper was thick and creamy, covered in dense, precise, and slightly slanted handwriting. This wasn't a diary of personal thoughts. The pages were filled with complex chemical formulas, intricate geological diagrams, and what looked like hand-drawn topographical maps of the lake and the surrounding land, marked with grids and cryptic annotations. It was the work of a brilliant, meticulous mind, a scientist's logbook. As he slowly turned the pages, Jake's disappointment began to morph into something else entirely, a deep, electrifying curiosity. This place wasn't just a forgotten wasteland, it was a puzzle, and he was holding the first piece. For the next 3 days, the dilapidated cabin became Jake's command center. The outside world, with its oppressive silence and foul-smelling lake, ceased to exist. His entire focus narrowed to the leather-bound notebook. He worked at a rickety wooden table, the only light coming from a battery-powered lantern that cast long, dancing shadows across the dusty room. Rex lay faithfully at his feet, his calm, rhythmic breathing a steady anchor in the sea of complex information. Jake's military background hadn't prepared him for advanced microbiology, but it had taught him how to analyze intelligence, identify patterns, and break down complex problems into manageable parts. He treated the notebook like a coded enemy transmission. He methodically went through it page by page, making his own notes on a yellow legal pad, cross-referencing diagrams with written passages, and circling terms that appeared repeatedly. Slowly, through the dense scientific language, a picture began to emerge. His uncle Simon wasn't just a geologist, he was a brilliant biochemist. The research wasn't just about rocks, it was about life. Specifically, it was about a unique, extremophilic bacterium that Simon had discovered living in the lake, a microbe that not only survived in the seemingly toxic, metal-rich water, but thrived in it. According to Simon's notes, this bacterium had an astonishing ability. It could metabolize certain metallic compounds, isolating and concentrating specific elements as a byproduct. Jake's blood ran cold when he finally understood the target elements. Neodymium, dysprosium, terbium, rare earth elements. The building blocks of modern technology, from smartphones to military guidance systems, and worth a fortune. His uncle hadn't just found a new species. He had discovered a revolutionary form of biological mining, a way to extract priceless resources without destructive machinery or toxic chemicals. The puzzle pieces clicked into place with an almost audible snap. The lake wasn't polluted in the conventional sense. It was a massive, living bioreactor, and he, Jake Riley, had just inherited it. Amidst the technical data, one name appeared over and over again: Dr. Aris Thorne. Simon wrote of Dr. Thorne with a deep respect, sometimes referring to him as a mentor, other times as a collaborator, from a project that dated back to the early 1980 seconds. A project that, according to a margin note, had been abruptly and suspiciously shut down. If anyone could help him understand the full scope of this, it was this man. As he delved deeper into the final sections of the notebook, the tone of the entries began to change. The detached, scientific observations gave way to something more personal, more urgent. The handwriting grew slightly less controlled. It was in these last few pages that Jake found the passage that made the hair on his arms stand up. "They know," Simon had written. "They have been watching the property. I fear my time is running out. They will not let this discovery see the light of day, not when they have so much to lose. If something happens to me, if this is read by the person I hope it is, know that I have secured the original data, the undeniable proof of their crimes. I have hidden it where sound conceals the silence." A cold dread washed over Jake. His uncle hadn't died in a simple accident. He had been expecting to die. This wasn't just a scientific breakthrough. It was a conspiracy, and his uncle was its victim. The phrase echoed in his mind, "where sound conceals the silence." It was a riddle, a final breadcrumb left by a man he never knew. He now had a name and a warning. The quiet solitude he had sought was gone, replaced by a sense of imminent danger. He carefully placed the notebook back in its protective case and hid it securely in his truck. "Come on, Rex," he said, his voice a low growl. "We're going to town." The drive back to Pine Creek felt different. The silent trees no longer seemed peaceful. They felt like they were hiding watchers. The small town, which had seemed quaint and harmless just days ago, now felt potentially hostile. Every person was a possible threat. He parked his truck in front of a building with a faded sign that read, "Pine Creek General Store." It seemed like the kind of place where local knowledge was bought and sold along with milk and bread. He pushed open the door, a small bell announcing his arrival. The store smelled of sawdust, coffee, and old paper. A man stood behind the counter, polishing a glass display case. He was middle-aged, with a round, friendly face, thinning hair, and a plaid shirt stretched taut over a generous belly. "Help you with something?" the man asked, his smile not quite reaching his small, observant eyes. "Just looking for some information," Jake said, keeping his tone casual. "I'm looking for a man named Dr. Eris Thorne. I was told he might live around here. In people. Is found, and co." The store owner's smile tightened for a fraction of a second. "Thorne, you say? Haven't heard that name in a long time. Used to live up on the old Ridge Road. What business would you have with him?" "Family matter," Jake replied evasively. "He was an old colleague of my great-uncle, Simon Riley." At the mention of Simon's name, the man's feigned friendliness evaporated, replaced by a sharp, calculating curiosity. "Simon Riley's nephew, are you? Heard someone moved in up at that old place. A real shame what happened to Simon. Hunting accident, they said." "That's what they said," Jake agreed, his gaze steady. He could feel the man's eyes probing him, trying to gauge how much he knew. He had found an informant, but not the kind he was hoping for. This man was a sentry, posted at the town's information crossroads. "Well, I can't help you with Dr. Thorne," the man said finally, turning back to his polishing. "Like I said, haven't seen him in years." Jake knew it was a lie. He bought a bottle of water he didn't need and walked out of the store. As he got back into his truck, he glanced in the rearview mirror. The store owner was standing in the doorway, watching him. A moment later, he saw the man pick up a phone. Jake started the engine and pulled away, the feeling of being watched now a cold certainty. He hadn't found Dr. Thorne, but he had found trouble. And he knew, with chilling clarity, that trouble had now found him too. The encounter at the general store had confirmed Jake's suspicions. He was no longer just a man seeking peace. He was a soldier on a reconnaissance mission in hostile territory. The store owner's phone call was a signal flare, and Jake knew he had to move fast before the enemy could rally. He drove past the edge of town and parked his truck at a small, dusty public library. The store owner had mentioned that Dr. Thorne used to live on the old Ridge Road. It was a slim lead, but it was all he had. Inside the library, he found a county records map from a decade ago. It showed the old Ridge Road winding up into the hills, with a few properties marked along its length. One of them was listed under the name A Thorne. With a new destination, Jake drove out of town, heading for the hills that loomed over the valley. The old Ridge Road was even more remote than the track leading to his own property. It was a narrow, winding lane, cracked and overgrown with weeds. After several miles, he saw a weathered mailbox, half hidden by an overgrown hedge. The name on the side was faded but still legible. Thorne. A long driveway led to a small, modern house that seemed out of place in the rustic wilderness. It was a fortress. Security cameras were mounted under the eaves, and a formidable iron gate blocked the entrance. Jake parked his truck and walked to the gate, pressing the button on an intercom. A moment later, a crackly voice answered. "Who is it? What do you want?" The voice was thin and reedy, laced with suspicion. "My name is Jake Riley. I need to speak with Dr. Eris Thorne. I'm Simon Riley's great-nephew." And him. There was a long silence on the other end. Jake could hear the faint sound of the wind rustling through the pines. He wondered if the man had simply decided not to answer. Finally, the voice came back, tight with tension. "Simon is dead." "I know," Jake said calmly. "That's why I'm here. He left something for me, something I think you need to see." Another pause, longer this time. Then, with a loud buzz, the gate clicked open. It was a clear invitation, but it felt like a test. Jake drove up to the house. The front door opened before he even got out of the truck. The man standing in the doorway was a shadow of the figure Simon had described in his notes. Dr. Eris Thorne was in his late 70s, thin and frail, with a halo of wispy white hair around a bald head. His skin was pale, almost translucent, and his large, intelligent eyes were magnified by thick glasses. He wore a simple cardigan over a buttoned shirt and leaned heavily on a wooden cane. He looked less like a groundbreaking scientist and more like a man haunted by his past. "Show me," Dr. Thorne said, his voice stronger in person. He didn't invite Jake inside. Jake retrieved the Pelican case from his truck and opened it on the hood. He handed the leather notebook to the old man. Dr. Thorne's hand trembled as he took it. He opened it, his eyes scanning the familiar, precise handwriting. A wave of emotions washed over his face, recognition, sorrow, and then a deep, weary anger. "I warned him," he whispered, his eyes still fixed on the pages. "I told him to destroy it, to run, but Simon was always stubborn, always believed in the truth." He finally looked up at Jake, his gaze sharp and piercing. "You have no idea what you've stumbled into, do you, son?" He finally gestured for Jake to come inside. The interior of the house was meticulously clean and orderly, but sparsely furnished. It felt more like a waiting room than a home. Dr. Thorne led him to a small study, lined with books on geology, chemistry, and botany. For the next hour, Dr. Thorne filled in the gaps. He and Simon had been part of a government-funded environmental research project back in the early 1980s. Their goal was to find natural solutions to clean up industrial waste sites. It was then that they discovered the bacteria in the lake and its incredible properties. But their funding was abruptly cut. A new private corporation, Geodynamic Solutions, swept in and bought the rights to all their research for a pittance. "We were naive," Dr. Thorne said, his voice bitter. "We thought they would continue our work. Instead, they buried it. They realized the land itself held a much bigger secret. The lake bed is sitting on one of the richest rare earth mineral deposits in North America. The bacteria was the key to unlocking it cheaply and cleanly. But they didn't want a clean method. They wanted a monopoly. F2 Sluve. Geodynamic Solutions had spent 40 years maintaining the illusion that the land was a worthless, polluted swamp, scaring off potential buyers and keeping the property isolated until they could secure full mineral rights without public oversight. Simon had stayed behind, a silent guardian, continuing his research in secret, gathering evidence of their conspiracy. "They killed him, Mr. Riley," Dr. Thorne said, his eyes locking onto Jake's. "Just as they will kill you if they think you stand in their way. That notebook is a death warrant. The man you met at the store, he works for them. The whole town is under their thumb. You are in terrible danger." The warning hung heavy in the air, a chilling confirmation of Jake's own fears. He left Dr. Thorne's house with a new sense of purpose, but also a profound sense of dread. The fight he had been running from had found him, here, in the deep woods of Oregon. As he drove down the winding ridge road, a sleek black sedan appeared from a sidetrack, pulling out and blocking his path. It was a stark contrast to the rugged landscape, all polished chrome and tinted windows. Jake's hand instinctively went to the floor of his truck, where he kept a tire iron. A man in a perfectly tailored gray suit got out of the sedan's passenger side. He was in his 40s, with slicked-back hair, a confident smile, and the predatory stillness of a shark. "Mr. Jake Riley?" the man asked, his voice smooth as silk. "My name is Mr. Sterling. I'm an attorney representing Geodynamic Solutions." Jake said nothing. His eyes narrowed, his body coiled and ready. Rex, in the passenger seat, let out a low, rumbling growl. "We understand you've recently inherited your great-uncle's property," Sterling continued, his smile never faltering. "A rather unfortunate piece of land. We are, however, prepared to make you a very generous offer to take it off your hands. Let's say $5 million, cash. You sign the papers, walk away, and never look back." The number was staggering, meant to shock and awe. It was a life-changing amount of money for a piece of land that, to any outside observer, was a worthless bog. "And if I say no?" Jake asked, his voice low and steady. Sterling's smile finally vanished, replaced by a cold, flat expression. "I wouldn't recommend that. This is a one-time offer, Mr. Riley. For your own well-being, I suggest you take it. Some things are best left undisturbed. The threat was unmistakable. Jake looked from the smug lawyer to the dark sedan and then to the vast, silent forest around them. His uncle had died for this land. Dr. Thorne was living in fear because of it, and now they were trying to scare him away too. "The answer is no," Jake said, his voice ringing with defiance. "Now, get your car off my road." For a long, tense moment, Sterling simply stared at Jake, his cold eyes promising retribution. The driver's side window of the sedan lowered, revealing another man in a dark suit, his hand resting near his jacket pocket. Finally, Sterling gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. He got back into the car without another word. The sedan reversed slowly, then turned and sped back down the road, disappearing into the trees, leaving only a cloud of dust and a heavy silence. The drive back to the cabin was a blur. Jake's mind was racing, replaying the conversation, the unveiled threat. $5 million. The number was absurd. It was proof that Dr. Thorne was right. The lake was worth a fortune, and Geodynamic Solutions would stop at nothing to get it. His hands gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. The old wariness, the hypervigilance he had tried so hard to suppress, was back in full force. He was no longer a civilian seeking solace. He was a combatant, and his remote, dilapidated inheritance had just become a battlefield. Back at the property, the silence he had once found oppressive now felt like a welcome ally. It meant he could hear any approaching threat. He parked his truck close to the cabin, positioning it to block the most obvious approach from the dirt track. Rex immediately jumped out, his body low to the ground, and began a patrol of the clearing, his nose to the air, sniffing, listening. Jake went inside and did his own sweep. He wedged a sturdy log against the inside of the flimsy front door and checked the boarded-up windows to ensure they were secure. It wasn't much, but it would buy him time. He retrieved the tire iron from his truck and placed it on the table next to the lantern. He had no firearms, a conscious choice he had made when he left the service, a choice he was now beginning to regret. As darkness fell, it brought a profound sense of isolation. The forest became an impenetrable wall of black, and every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, was magnified. Jake didn't even try to sleep. He sat at the table, the lantern casting a small pool of light, Simon's notebook open in front of him. He wasn't studying it now. It was bait. He knew they would come. Sterling's offer was the first move. When it failed, the second move would be force. Rex lay by the door, a silent gray and white sentinel. His ears twitched at every sound, his head lifting, his amber eyes fixed on the darkness outside. Hours passed. The only sound was the ticking of Jake's watch and the soft sigh of the wind. It happened just after 2 in the morning. Rex went from resting to full alert in an instant. A low, guttural growl rumbled deep in his chest. He stood up, the fur on his back bristling. Jake's head snapped up. He listened, straining his ears, and heard it too. The soft crunch of footsteps on gravel, trying to be stealthy, but failing. There were 2 of them. Jake extinguished the lantern, plunging the room into near total darkness. He moved silently to the wall next to the door, the heavy tire iron gripped in his hand. His heart hammered against his ribs, but his breathing was slow and controlled. The fear was there, a cold knot in his stomach, but his training took over, pushing the panic down, sharpening his senses. There was a soft creak on the porch, then the sound of a tool prying at the door lock. The cheap lock gave way with a sickening, splintering sound. The door swung inward, revealing 2 large silhouettes against the faint starlight. They paused in the doorway, letting their eyes adjust. One was tall and bulky, the other slightly shorter, but with a wiry, dangerous energy. "Riley," the shorter one called out, his voice a harsh whisper. "We know you're in here. Sterling gave you the easy way out. Now you get the hard way. Give us the book, and we might let you walk away." Jake remained silent, pressed against the wall, a shadow within the shadows. "Have it your way," the man snarled. He stepped inside, a powerful flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The beam swept across the room, over the empty chair, and settled on the notebook lying on the table. As the second larger man stepped through the doorway, Jake gave Rex a single sharp command, a word they had used 100 times in the field. Watch. It was all Rex needed. He exploded from the darkness like a missile, a blur of gray and white fur and pure, focused fury. He didn't bark. He didn't warn. He struck. His powerful jaws clamped down on the larger man's thigh, his teeth sinking deep. The man screamed, a high-pitched shriek of pain and surprise, and stumbled backward, the flashlight flying from his hand and clattering across the floor. The distraction was perfect. Jake moved. He swung the tire iron in a hard, vicious arc, connecting with the back of the shorter man's knee. The man cried out and crumpled, his leg buckling under him. Before he could recover, Jake brought the iron bar up, striking his wrist and sending the crowbar he was holding skittering into a corner. The larger man was trying to fight Rex off, punching and kicking at the dog, but Rex held on with relentless tenacity, shaking his head, his growl a terrifying sound in the small cabin. Jake left the first intruder on the floor and lunged for the second. He was a trained Marine, a veteran of close-quarters combat. He moved with a brutal efficiency, striking the man hard in the ribs, then driving a knee into his stomach. The man doubled over, gasping for air. Jake grabbed him by the collar and slammed his head against the solid log wall. The man went limp and slid to the floor in a heap. He turned back to the first man, who was trying to crawl away. Jake put a boot on his back, pinning him to the floor. "Call him off!" The man wheezed, his voice filled with terror, as Rex finally released the other man and turned his attention, his teeth bared and bloody, toward him. "Stay, Rex," Jake commanded. The dog immediately stopped, but remained poised, a low growl still vibrating in his chest. The fight was over in less than a minute. The cabin was a wreck, the air thick with the scent of sweat and fear. Adrenaline coursed through Jake's veins. He was shaking, not from fear, but from the violent release of a part of himself he had tried to bury. He stood there for a long moment, breathing heavily in the dark, the two unconscious men at his feet. Rex nudged his hand, whining softly as if asking if he was okay. Jake knelt and ran a hand over the dog's head, checking him for injuries. He was fine. The brutal reality of his situation had been laid bare. This wasn't a corporate dispute. This was a war. They had sent men to hurt him, to take what was his. They had underestimated him. They had underestimated his dog, and in doing so, they had sealed his resolve. He wasn't leaving. He wasn't running. This was his land now. This was his fight. He would see it through to the end, not just for himself, but for the uncle he never knew, and for the truth that lay buried beneath the foul waters of the lake. Dawn broke, painting the gray sky in pale strokes of pink and orange. The light filtered into the trashed cabin, illuminating the two unconscious men on the floor. Jake had spent the hours before sunrise securing them with rope he found in an old shed. He had searched their pockets, finding wallets with IDs that listed addresses hours away and cheap burner phones. They were hired muscle, disposable assets, sent to do a job. He couldn't go to the local police. Dr. Thorne's warning and the store owner's reaction made it clear that the town's law enforcement was likely compromised. Sheriff Patterson. The name echoed in his mind. He was on his own, but he couldn't just execute these men, and he couldn't keep them here. Using their own car, which he found hidden down a nearby logging road, he drove them miles away, deep into the national forest. He left them, still bound, on a deserted track, with a bottle of water and a note of warning scrawled on a piece of cardboard. It was a risk, but it was better than the alternative. By the time they were found, he would be long gone, and they would have a hard time explaining what had happened. Returning to the cabin, the adrenaline from the fight had been replaced by a cold, hard clarity. He had survived the first assault, but there would be more. Geodynamic Solutions was a multi-million-dollar corporation. They wouldn't be deterred by two failed thugs. He couldn't win a war of attrition. He couldn't fight an army alone. He needed to change the battlefield. He needed to bring this fight out of the shadows and into the light. He remembered seeing a small office in Pine Creek, a sign in the window reading, Pine Creek Chronicle. It was a long shot, but a local newspaper was a place to start. He hid Simon's notebook in a secure spot, deep in the woods, a place only he and Rex could find, and drove back to town. The office of the Pine Creek Chronicle was a small, cluttered space sandwiched between a hardware store and a closed-down bakery. It smelled of old paper, ink, and stale coffee. A woman sat at a large desk in the back, her face illuminated by the glow of a computer monitor, her fingers flying across a keyboard. She looked up as he entered, and Jake found himself looking into a pair of sharp, intelligent brown eyes. This was Maya Singh. She was, perhaps in her early 30s, with dark hair pulled back into a practical ponytail. She wore a simple dark green blouse and jeans, the clothes of someone more interested in their work than their appearance. Her expression was one of intense focus, a slight frown of concentration etched between her brows. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice clear and direct. She wasn't unfriendly, but she was busy. "My name is Jake Riley," he began, his voice low. "I'd like to report a crime." Maya's expression shifted to one of professional interest, mixed with a healthy dose of small-town skepticism. "Okay. Did you file a report with the sheriff's department?" "No," Jake said, "and I'm not going to. I think the sheriff might be part of the problem." That got her full attention. She leaned back in her chair, folding her arms across her chest. Her skeptical look deepened. "That's a serious accusation. You have any proof to back that up?" Jake knew he had to play this carefully. He started with the facts of the previous night. He described the break-in, the two men, the fight. He showed her a fresh, dark bruise forming on his forearm where he had blocked a blow. Maya listened intently, her journalistic instincts kicking in. She made a few notes, but her face remained impassive. A nasty break-in for sure, but that doesn't mean the sheriff is involved. What did they want? "This," Jake said, deciding to take a calculated risk. He pulled a few folded pages from his pocket. They were photocopies he had made of Simon's final, most alarming entries, the ones that spoke of being watched, the ones that predicted his death. He left out the scientific details. Maya took the pages and read them. She read them twice. The professional mask slipped for a moment, replaced by a flicker of genuine intrigue. A reclusive scientist, a mysterious death, a violent attack on his heir. It was the kind of story that went far beyond the usual town council meetings and county fairs. "My great-uncle, Simon Riley, wrote this just before he died," Jake explained. "They said it was a hunting accident." "I remember that," Maya said slowly, her eyes still on the pages. "It happened a few months ago. It was quiet. Too quiet, now that I think about it." She looked up at Jake, her gaze assessing him, weighing his story. "This is a deep rabbit hole you're pointing at, Mr. Riley. If what you're suggesting is true, you're not just in a little trouble. You're in a war with a very powerful company." "I'm aware," Jake said. "That's why I'm here. I can't fight them alone." A silence settled between them. Maya tapped a pen against her notepad, the rhythmic clicks the only sound in the room. Finally, she nodded. "All right, Riley, you've got my attention. Let's see what we can find." For the rest of the afternoon, they became a team. They started in the newspaper's own archives, a collection of bound volumes and filing cabinets in a back room. Maya's fingers moved with practiced ease through the records. She found the article about Simon's death. It was short, barely a column inch on page 3. It quoted Sheriff Patterson extensively, who described it as a tragic but straightforward accident and stated that no foul play was suspected. There was no mention of an autopsy. "That's sloppy," Maya murmured, more to herself than to Jake. For an unwitnessed death, an autopsy should be standard procedure, especially for a man with no known medical issues. Next, they moved to the county records office. Poring over plat maps and property deeds, a clear and disturbing pattern emerged. Over the past 40 years, nearly every parcel of land bordering Simon Riley's property had been purchased. One by one. The buyer was always a different LLC, a different holding company, with an anonymous name. But when Maya did some quick digging online, she found that all of those shell companies traced back to a single parent corporation, Geodynamic Solutions. They had built a wall of land around the lake, isolating it, ensuring no one could get close, no one could accidentally stumble upon its secret. They walked out of the records office into the late afternoon sun. The pieces were falling into place, forming a picture of a conspiracy that was vast, patient, and utterly ruthless. "The sheriff, the land purchases, your uncle's accident," Maya said, her voice tight with a mixture of excitement and fear. "This is big, Jake. Bigger than I could have imagined." Jake looked at this woman, this stranger who had chosen to step into the line of fire with him. He had come here looking for an ally, and he had found one. His fight was no longer a solo mission. The drive away from the county records office was quiet, charged with the weight of their discoveries. The silent, methodical conspiracy laid bare in the property deeds was more chilling than a direct threat. It spoke of patience, of immense resources, and of a cold corporate ruthlessness that had been at work for decades. Maya drove, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. Jake sat in the passenger seat, his gaze fixed on the passing scenery. But his mind was back in the cabin, picturing the complex formulas and diagrams in his uncle's notebook. They had the who and the what. Geodynamic Solutions wanted his land, but the why was still a puzzle. A scientific enigma locked in Simon's cryptic handwriting. "We have to go back to Dr. Thorne," Jake said, breaking the silence. "He's the only one who can make sense of the science. The full story is in that book, I Know It Island. We've just been reading the footnotes." Maya nodded, her expression grim. "I agree. But we have to be careful. They know you've been asking questions. They know you turned down their offer. After last night, they'll be watching you, watching both of us. They made a plan." Maya dropped Jake at the edge of town, where he slipped through the woods on a wide, circling path back to his truck, ensuring he wasn't followed. He then drove back to the cabin, the feeling of being watched prickling the back of his neck the entire way. He retrieved the original notebook from its hiding place. Rex, who had been anxiously awaiting his return, seemed to sense the renewed urgency, staying closer to Jake's side than ever. Under the cover of dusk, Jake drove to a prearranged meeting point on a deserted road miles from town. Maya was waiting. He left his truck hidden in the trees and got into her car, with Rex hopping into the back seat, a silent, watchful guardian. They took a long, roundabout route to Dr. Thorne's house on the ridge, checking their rearview mirror constantly. When they arrived at the fortified gate, Jake spoke into the intercom. "Dr. Thorne, it's Jake Riley. I'm back, and I've brought help." The gate buzzed open without a word. Dr. Thorne was waiting for them at the door, his frail frame silhouetted against the light from inside. His eyes, magnified by his glasses, darted nervously between Jake, Maya, and the dark shape of the car. He saw Maya's press credentials, which she held up for him to see, and his shoulders slumped with a mix of fear and resignation. "I told you to leave, Mr. Riley," he said, his voice a weary sigh. "I told you this was dangerous." "The danger found me," Jake replied, his voice hard. "They sent men to my cabin last night." He then explained what he and Maya had discovered: the sheriff's suspicious report, the systematic land purchases by Geodynamics shell companies. Dr. Thorne listened, his face growing paler with each new piece of evidence. The conspiracy he had feared for so long was no longer a ghost. It was standing on his doorstep. He ushered them inside, his earlier caution replaced by a grim resolve. In his study, Jake laid the leather notebook on the desk. "We need your help," he said. "We need to understand what's really in here, all of it." For the next several hours, the small study became a command center. With Maya taking meticulous notes and Jake pointing out the sections he couldn't decipher, Dr. Thorne delved back into the work of his old friend. He spread the pages out, his trembling fingers tracing the lines of chemical equations and geological charts. He muttered to himself, lost in the scientific language that was his native tongue. "Incredible," he whispered, his eyes wide with a scientist's awe. Absolutely revolutionary. He turned to them, his face alight with a mixture of excitement and horror. You've had it wrong. We all have. The lake isn't polluted, not in the way we think of pollution, he began to explain, his voice growing stronger, more animated. The unique bacteria they had discovered decades ago didn't just break down toxins. Simon had discovered its true potential. It performed a type of natural, biological alchemy. It latched onto the rare earth mineral deposits in the lake bed and, as part of its metabolic process, separated the valuable elements from the surrounding ore, releasing them into the water in a suspended, molecular state. The discoloration of the water, the metallic smell, the oily sheen, Dr. Thorne explained, pointing to specific formulas in the notebook. It's not industrial waste. It's the signature of a highly efficient, perfectly controlled biomining operation in progress. Simon didn't just find the key. He built a whole new kind of engine and learned how to drive it. The final pages of the notebook, the ones that had been the most cryptic, laid out the process for harvesting these suspended elements from the water, a process that was clean, cheap, and yielded a purity of material that traditional mining couldn't hope to match. Simon Riley hadn't just been a guardian. He had been an inventor on the verge of a world-changing breakthrough. In that moment, the final, terrible piece of the puzzle clicked into place. The motive for his murder was suddenly, brutally clear. Geodynamic doesn't want to use his method, Maya said, her voice barely a whisper, a look of dawning horror on her face. They just want the minerals. They want to drain the lake, bring in heavy machinery, and strip mine the entire valley. Consequences be damned. Exactly, Dr. Thorne affirmed, his voice trembling with rage. Simon's discovery was a threat to their entire plan. If he went public, he wouldn't just be exposing the value of the land. He'd be presenting a clean, environmentally perfect alternative to their destructive methods. He would have been hailed as a hero. The government would have protected the site. Geodynamic would have lost everything. Jake stared at the notebook, at his uncle's precise, steady handwriting. Simon had known the value of his work. He had known the danger he was in. He had refused to sell, refused to be silenced. He was preparing to announce his findings to the world, and for that, Geodynamic had murdered him and disguised his death as a simple accident. The weight of it all settled in the small room. It wasn't just about a piece of land anymore. It was about a legacy of genius, a conspiracy of greed, and the murder of a good man who had tried to protect them both. The drive back from Dr. Thorne's house was a somber, silent affair. The truth, now fully revealed, was a heavy burden. It was a story of genius betrayed, of corporate greed so vast it had casually swallowed a man's life. They left Dr. Thorne in his fortified home, a frail guardian of a terrible secret, promising to stay in contact. Back at the cabin, Jake paced the small room like a caged animal. Rex, sensing his master's turmoil, shadowed his every move, his amber eyes filled with concern. Maya sat at the rough wooden table, reviewing her notes, her face a mask of grim determination. They had the whole story, the motive, the science, the 40-year conspiracy, but it was still their word against a billion-dollar corporation. They had Simon's notebook, but a savvy lawyer could dismiss it as the ramblings of an eccentric old man. They needed something more, something irrefutable. "It's here. It has to be," Jake muttered, stopping to run a hand through his hair. He picked up the photocopied pages of Simon's final entry and read the line aloud for the 10th time. "The final proof is safe, hidden where sound conceals the silence." "It's a riddle," Maya said, looking up from her notes. "A poetic way of saying something is hidden in a noisy place. But there are no noisy places out here," Jake countered, gesturing to the oppressive quiet of the surrounding forest. "That's the whole point of this place. It's silent, too silent. APSB, to had in the word." He walked to the cabin door and stared out at the dark, still surface of the lake. Rex came and stood beside him, resting his head against Jake's leg. The silence, the unnatural silence. And then, his mind made the connection. There was one place on this property that wasn't silent, one place where a constant, natural sound drowned out everything else. The waterfall, he said, his voice low with dawning realization. There's a small waterfall on the creek that feeds into the far side of the lake. It's not big, but the sound, it's all you can hear when you're near it. Maya stood up, her eyes widening. Sound conceals the silence. It fits. They didn't wait. Armed with powerful flashlights and Jake's entrenching tool, they set off, with Rex leading the way. They skirted the edge of the lake, the beam of their flashlights cutting through the inky darkness. The air grew cooler and damper as they approached the creek, and soon a low rumble became audible, growing steadily louder. The waterfall was tucked away in a small, rocky cove, a cascade of water tumbling about 20 feet over a ledge of dark, moss-covered rock into a churning pool below. The roar of the water was immersive, a constant, powerful white noise that seemed to vibrate in their chests. It was the perfect place to hide something. The sound was a curtain, shielding whatever lay behind it. As they got closer, Rex's behavior changed. The dog, usually calm and confident, became agitated. He whined, a low, nervous sound, and stayed close to Jake's legs, his ears flattened. He kept looking toward the sheet of falling water, his body tense. "What is it, boy?" Jake asked, placing a reassuring hand on the dog's back. Rex didn't respond to the touch. Instead, he moved forward cautiously, planting his feet at the edge of the rocky pool, and began to bark. It wasn't an aggressive bark, but a sharp, insistent, and frantic sound directed at a specific spot behind the curtain of water. "He's found something," Maya said, her voice raised to be heard over the roar. Jake looked where Rex was barking. Behind the cascade, he could just make out a dark, shadowy area, a recess in the rock face, an alcove. Taking a deep breath of the cold, misty air, he began to carefully pick his way across the slippery rocks at the edge of the pool. The spray was icy, soaking his clothes in seconds. He pushed through the curtain of water and found himself in a small, damp cave, no bigger than a closet. The roar of the waterfall was deafening in here, and there, tucked into a high corner, was a dark shape. It was another sealed case, this one made of metal, wedged tightly into a natural crevice in the rock. It took him several minutes of strenuous effort to pry it loose. It was heavy and cold to the touch. He carried it back out through the water, his heart pounding with a mixture of triumph and dread. He set the case on a flat rock. Back in the relative quiet of the cabin, they gathered around the table. The metal case was an old military-style ammunition box, sealed with a thick bead of waterproof caulk. Jake used his knife to cut the seal and lifted the heavy lid. The contents were perfectly preserved. On top lay a series of clear plastic tubes containing cylindrical core samples of rock and soil, each meticulously labeled in Simon's precise script. Beneath them was a thick file folder. Maya lifted it out with trembling hands. It contained the original signed government contracts for the research project from the 1,980 along with internal memos from Geodynamic Solutions discussing the containment of the project's findings. It was the paper trail that proved the conspiracy, but it was the last item, nestled at the bottom of the box, that made their blood run cold. It was a small microcassette recorder and a single labeled tape. The label read, GDS, Final Offer. Jake took the recorder, his hands surprisingly steady. He inserted the tape and pressed play. After a moment of static, two voices filled the small cabin. One was his Uncle Simon's, calm and resolute. The other was smooth, arrogant, and dripping with menace, a voice they recognized from online interviews. It was Marcus Thorne, the founder and CEO of Geodynamic Solutions. The recording captured their final, fateful conversation. Simon was refusing to sell, stating his intention to publish his research. Thorne's voice, which had started as deceptively reasonable, grew colder, harder. "You're an old man, Simon." Thorne's voice crackled from the small speaker. "You're standing in the way of progress, in the way of billions of dollars. That's a very unhealthy place to be. The health of this planet is more important than your profits, Marcus, Simon's voice replied, unwavering. There was a pause. Then Thorne's voice dropped to a venomous whisper, a sound that would haunt Jake forever. You have a choice. Sign the land over and disappear. Or you can have an accident. A tragic hunting accident, perhaps. No one will ever know. Make your choice. If not, the tape ended with a soft click. The silence that followed was absolute, a heavy, suffocating blanket. They had found it. The smoking gun. The final, undeniable proof of a murder, spoken in the killer's own voice. The silence in the cabin after the tape ended was heavier than any sound. It was the silence of a tomb, the silence of a 40-year-old crime finally, irrevocably exposed. In that small, flickering lantern light, they held the truth in their hands, a truth that was ugly, violent, and undeniable. There was no discussion, no debate. They both knew what had to be done. The battlefield had to change, immediately. While Geodynamic was still operating under the assumption that they were dealing with one isolated man, they had to strike. I'm driving back to the office now, Maya said, her voice a low, steady hum of focused energy. She began carefully packing the evidence, the core samples, the documents, and the microcassette tape into a waterproof bag. I'm going to write this story tonight. All of it. I'll upload it to the Chronicles website, and I'll send it to every national newswire I have a contact for. They'll come for you, Jake warned, his voice grim. Let them try, she shot back, a fire in her eyes. They can't kill a story once it's on the internet. They parted ways with a shared look of grim resolve. Jake stayed at the cabin, a decoy and a guardian. He and Rex began to fortify the property in earnest, not for a long siege, but to survive one more night. As he worked, Jake's mind was a whirlwind. He had come here seeking to escape a war, only to find himself at the center of a new one. But this fight was different. It wasn't about survival. It was about justice. It was for his uncle. Maya worked through the night, fueled by coffee and a righteous fury. The story poured out of her, a torrent of facts, timelines, and damning evidence. She wove together the tale of a forgotten research project, a revolutionary discovery, a patient, ruthless corporate conspiracy, and the murder of a brilliant scientist who stood in its way. She embedded a digital copy of the audio file directly into the article. At 4 a.m., she hit the publish button. The effect was instantaneous and explosive. The story didn't just make a ripple. It was a tsunami. It was picked up from the newswires by a Seattle blogger, then a national investigative journalist on social media. By sunrise, number Geodynamic Murders was trending. The audio of Marcus Thorne's threat was being played on morning news shows across the country. The story of the lone veteran and his loyal dog standing up to a corporate giant was irresistible. The media storm had begun. By 10 a.m., the cavalry arrived. Not the local police, but 3 black SUVs with government plates that rolled down the dirt track and parked in the clearing. Men in dark suits and windbreakers with FBI emblazoned in yellow letters on the back emerged. They moved with a quiet, intimidating efficiency. The agent in charge approached Jake, who was standing on the porch with Rex sitting calmly by his side. The agent was a tall, sharp-featured man in his 40s with graying temples and eyes that missed nothing. His name was Agent Miller. Mr. Riley, he said, his voice calm and professional. He didn't offer a handshake. I'm Special Agent Miller with the FBI. We've been monitoring certain financial irregularities concerning Geodynamic Solutions for some time. Miss Singh's article, and more specifically that recording, has provided the probable cause we needed to accelerate our investigation. We're taking over now. It wasn't a request. It was a statement of fact. While one team of agents began a meticulous search of the property, securing the original evidence from Jake, Agent Miller, and another team drove into Pine Creek. They didn't go to the sheriff's office. They went to Sheriff Patterson's home. They found him in his driveway, about to get into his patrol car. He saw the black SUVs pull up, saw the men in suits get out, and the color drain from his face. He knew the game was over. Agent Miller didn't raise his voice. He simply opened a file folder. "Sheriff Patterson," he began, his tone icy. "We have bank statements showing regular deposits into an offshore account. Deposits that trace back through a series of shell companies to Geodynamic Solutions. We also have recordings of you speaking with their lawyer, Mr. Sterling, promising to handle the Simon Riley situation. You have two choices. You can face federal charges for conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and accessory to murder, and you will spend the rest of your life in a federal prison. Or you can give us a full confession, testify against everyone you worked with, and we can discuss a deal with the U.S. Attorney's Office." Patterson, a man who had projected an aura of small-town authority for years, crumbled. He was a bully and a coward, and faced with the implacable weight of the federal government, he broke completely. He began talking right there in his driveway, the words spilling out in a desperate, pathetic torrent. The dominoes began to fall, quickly and publicly. That afternoon, based on Patterson's immediate confession and the mountain of evidence, federal arrest warrants were issued. News helicopters swarmed the skies above Geodynamic Solutions' gleaming corporate headquarters in Portland. On the evening news, Jake and Maya watched from the cabin's porch on a small, battery-powered television. They saw footage of a stunned Marcus Thorne being led from his office in handcuffs, his arrogant smirk replaced by a mask of disbelief. They saw Mr. Sterling, the smooth, confident lawyer, trying to hide his face from the cameras as he was placed in the back of an FBI vehicle. A stern-faced federal prosecutor stood before a bank of microphones and announced a full-scale investigation into Geodynamic Solutions, citing charges that included corporate fraud, racketeering, and conspiracy to commit murder. The 40-year reign of silence and fear was over. The truth was finally out in the light, for all the world to see. Jake looked out at the lake, its murky surface reflecting the colors of the setting sun. Rex rested his head on his master's knee. The fight wasn't completely over, but they had won the war. The months that followed the arrests were a whirlwind of legal proceedings, media attention, and profound change. The story of Simon Riley's lake became a national symbol of the battle between corporate greed and environmental preservation. Geodynamic Solutions, buried under an avalanche of federal charges and public outrage, was dismantled, its assets frozen, its executives facing long prison sentences. Slowly, the storm passed. The news crews left, the federal agents finished their work, and a new kind of quiet settled over the land. It wasn't the menacing, unnatural silence Jake had first encountered. This was a silence of peace, of healing, a quiet filled with the promise of a future. The U.S. government, in a rare and widely publicized move, declared the lake and the surrounding property a National Environmental Research Preserve. A team of officials from the Environmental Protection Agency came to the cabin. They sat with Jake on the now repaired porch and made him a final, official offer from the federal government, a sum in the high 8 figures to purchase the land and the rights to his uncle's technology. Jake listened politely, Rex lying faithfully at his feet. When they were finished, he looked out at the water, which already seemed a little less murky, a little more alive. "Thank you for the offer," he said, his voice calm and steady. "But this land is not for sale. Its value isn't something you can measure in dollars. My uncle died protecting it, and I intend to honor his legacy." And so, a new chapter began. With the help of Maya, whose reporting had earned her a national award, and Dr. Thorne, who seemed to have shed 20 years of fear and seclusion, Jake established a non-profit organization. They called it the Simon Riley Legacy Fund. Its mission was twofold: to oversee the complete restoration of the lake using Simon's own methods, and to license the biomining technology to environmental cleanup projects around the world, using the profits to fund further research and restoration efforts. Dr. Thorne, once a recluse, became the Foundation's chief scientific advisor, his mind as sharp as ever, now fueled by a renewed sense of purpose. He worked with a team of bright young scientists, sharing his and Simon's knowledge, his frail body energized by the work. Maya took a position on the board of directors, her sharp intellect and journalistic integrity guiding their public outreach, ensuring their work remained transparent and true to their mission. Jake was the heart of it all. He was no CEO, no scientist, no public speaker. He was the guardian. He lived in the now renovated cabin, which he had repaired with his own hands, turning the decaying relic into a warm, sturdy home. He worked alongside the scientists, learning the practical applications of his uncle's research. He was the one who walked the property every day, who knew its rhythms, its secrets. The ghosts of his past had not vanished entirely. They were still there, in the quiet moments before dawn, in the echo of a sudden, sharp noise. But they no longer had power over him. The hypervigilance that had once been a curse was now a gift, an awareness that connected him to the land. The discipline, forged in the crucible of war, now had a new, constructive purpose. He was building, not destroying. He was nurturing life, not evading death. One cool autumn evening, Jake sat on a large, flat rock by the water's edge, the same spot where he had first looked upon the polluted swamp with such despair. The sun was setting, painting the sky in fiery shades of orange and purple. The foul, metallic smell was gone, replaced by the clean, earthy scent of the forest. The water was clearer now. He could see the rocky bottom near the shore. A dragonfly, the first he had seen, skimmed across the surface. Rex sat beside him, his body pressed comfortably against Jake's leg. The dog let out a soft sigh of contentment, his amber eyes watching the water. He, too, seemed to be at peace here. The constant tension he had carried since they arrived was gone, replaced by the calm confidence of a dog who knows he is home. Jake ran a hand through the dog's thick fur. He had come here looking for an escape, a place to hide from the world, a place to be silent. Instead, he had found a voice. He had found a reason to fight. He had found a community, a purpose, a connection to the uncle he never knew. He finally understood the true nature of his inheritance. It wasn't the land or the billions of dollars worth of minerals hidden beneath it. It was a chance to heal a small, wounded piece of the planet, and in doing so, to heal the wounded pieces of his own soul. Simon Riley's legacy wasn't in the ground. It was in the clean water, in the new life beginning to return, and in the profound, quiet peace that had finally settled in his own heart. The war was over. He was home. Sometimes the greatest legacies we inherit are not of land or money, but of purpose and the unwavering loyalty of a friend who helps us find it. The bond between a person and their dog can truly heal the deepest of wounds, reminding us that we are never truly alone on our journey. If this story of Jake and Rex touched your heart, please consider sharing it so it might touch others as well. Your likes, comments, and subscriptions are what allow our community to grow and share more tales like this. We have another story we think you'll love waiting for you right on the screen now.